The wind screamed across the frozen valley like a giant beast searching for prey. Snowflakes did not fall gently. They attacked from every direction, sharp and painful, cutting through skin like tiny blades. The ice storm had come earlier than anyone expected. Houses were shaking, trees were snapping, and the sky looked like a swirling white ocean. In the middle of this deadly chaos, an alien mother named Lyra ran through the snow with her small child tightly wrapped in her arms. Lyra's legs were numb. Her face burned from the cold. Every breath felt like she was swallowing ice. She tried to shield her child, Rin, with her body, but the storm kept pushing them like they were nothing. Rin's tiny hands were turning blue, and his soft cries were growing weak. That scared Lyra more than the storm itself. She shouted for help, but no one opened their doors. Everyone was hiding, protecting themselves. No one wanted to risk their lives for a half-frozen child. The village was known for its strict rules. Every family cared only for their own. Lyra knew this, but still, she hoped someone would help her. She hoped someone would show a little kindness. But every door stayed closed and every window stayed dark. Her heart felt heavier than the snow under her feet. She whispered to her child that she would keep him alive, even if the storm tried to take him. But inside, she felt fear growing like a shadow. A strong gust of wind pushed her down. She fell on her knees, hugging Rin close to her chest. The snow around her swirled so fast it looked like white smoke. She could not even see the ground properly. Her face was wet with melted snow and tears she didn't even feel. Rin's cries became softer, weaker, and her heart broke a little more. She shouted again, louder this time, her voice trembling. "Please, someone help my child." Only the storm answered back. Lyra stood up again, shaking, desperate. She forced her numb legs to move, step by step. Her body felt like it would collapse any second. She could not stop thinking about losing Rin in this cold. She did not care about herself, only her child. She needed shelter, fire, warmth, anything, but the storm was too strong. Her vision blurred. Her breath came out in short, painful gasps. She felt the cold slowly stealing her strength away. And then she saw something. At first, it looked like a shadow moving between the snow. A dark shape cutting through the white storm. Lyra stopped, unsure if her eyes were tricking her. Maybe it was just the wind playing with her. Maybe it was some dangerous creature. Or maybe it was help. She held Rin closer and squinted her eyes, trying to see clearly. The shadow moved again. It came closer, slow, steady, and tall. Lyra's heart started beating faster. She took a step back. She was ready to run if she had to. But then, the shadow lifted an arm to cover its face from the storm. Lyra froze. That movement. It was human? A human? No, it couldn't be. Humans lived outside their valley. They rarely came near the alien settlements. And everyone told her humans were selfish, dangerous, and uncaring. They said humans never helped anyone but themselves. Lyra didn't know if that was true, but she had never met a human in her life. The stories were enough to fill her with fear. Still, the figure kept coming toward her, and she noticed something strange. The human was struggling, yes, but he walked with purpose. He was moving towards her cries. Towards the danger. Towards the storm center. Who would do that? The human stopped a few steps away. His clothes were covered in thick snow. His face was red from the cold, and his breaths came out like smoke. But his eyes searched for the child. Not for danger. Not for her. For the child. Is the child hurt? He shouted through the wind. His voice was deep but kind. Lyra didn't answer for a moment. She was too shocked, too confused. Why would a human come into this storm for her child? She didn't know. But when Rin let out a faint whimper, she stepped forward, trusting a stranger she had feared her whole life, The human took off his thick coat and wrapped it around Rin without hesitation. He didn't care about the cold. He didn't care about himself. He only cared that the child survived. Lyra stared at him with wide eyes. For the first time in her life, she saw something she never believed existed, a human showing mercy. Asterisk. The wind kept roaring like a wild creature hungry for life, but the human man did not step back. He stood in front of Lyra, breathing heavily, the snow collecting on his shoulders like thick white dust. His face was frozen, lips turning pale, but his eyes were sharp, focused on the child in her arms. Lyra felt confused, scared, and strangely protected all at once. She could not understand why he came for them. No one else did. The human gently touched Rin's forehead, checking the child's temperature. His hands were shaking from the cold, but his movements were steady, controlled. He had experience. Lyra watched with wide eyes as he quickly adjusted the coat around the child's body, making sure every part was covered. The wind slapped them from behind, but the man moved forward, using his own back as a shield to block the cold from hitting Rin. "Follow me," he shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. The words were short, but they carried strength. Lyra hesitated for a moment. She looked at him, this stranger, this human, and then at her child's weak face. She realized she had no choice if she wanted Rin to live. She nodded slowly, trembling, and stepped behind him. The man started walking, pushing through the thick snow with determination. The storm grew stronger with each minute. The snowflakes felt sharper, almost like tiny glass pieces hitting their skin. Lyra tried to keep up with him, but her legs were weak and heavy. She could hear his breathing, loud and steady, as he fought the storm with every step. After a few minutes, Lyra slipped. Her foot sank deep into the snow, and she fell to her knees. She tried to stand up, but her legs didn't respond. She was too cold, too exhausted. She hugged Rin tightly to keep him warm, her tears mixing with the freezing wind. The human noticed her fall instantly. He turned back and rushed toward her. Without saying a word, he held out his hand. His glove was torn, his fingers were red and bruised, but he still offered his help. Lyra stared at his hand, large, rough, human. Her people always told her humans were cruel and heartless, but here he was, risking everything for her and her child. She grabbed his hand, and he lifted her up with surprising strength. Then, without warning, he took Rin from her arms and secured the child against his own chest. The warmth from his body transferred into the child immediately. Lyra felt a strange mix of fear and relief. No alien had ever held her child like that. No one had dared to. The human did not waste another second. He turned and walked forward, now carrying Rin under his coat. Lyra followed closely, watching how carefully he protected the child. Every time the wind grew violent, he leaned his body into it, shielding Rin with his full weight. Every time snow threatened to blind them, he lifted his arm to block it. Lyra watched him and felt her heart shift little by little. She had never seen such bravery, not even from her own people. Humans were supposed to be cold, but this one walked through death for a child he didn't know. Minutes felt like hours. The storm showed no mercy. They could barely see a few feet ahead. But the human kept moving with an almost stubborn determination. Lyra wondered what kind of life he had lived to become so strong. Why did he care? Why did he help strangers? Suddenly, a large piece of ice flew toward them, carried by the violent wind. Lyra gasped, thinking it would hit the child. But the human stepped in front of it and took the blow on his shoulder. He stumbled but didn't fall. His jaw clenched in pain and a low groan escaped him, but he never loosened his grip on Rin. Lyra froze. She stared at him, shocked. No one in her village would take such a hit for a stranger. But he did. A human did. Why? Why are you doing this? She finally shouted through the wind. The man didn't slow down. He didn't turn around. He just said, loud and clear, because he needs help. Simple words, yet they felt like thunder inside her heart. Because he needs help, not because they were important. Not because they were special. Not because of reward or pressure or fear. Just because a child needed help. Lyra followed him silently, her eyes burning from more than the cold. She felt something heavy crumble inside her, fear, anger, prejudice. She didn't know this human, but she trusted him with her child's life without thinking. And that scared her even more. The storm finally thinned for a moment, revealing a blurry shape ahead, something built into the snowy ground. A structure. The human pointed toward it. Shelter, hope. Lyra felt her heart lift for the first time since the storm began. And all because a human, whom she feared since childhood, was now guiding her through a nightmare with nothing but courage. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. But she knew one thing. He was saving her child when no one else would. The storm did not calm. It grew stronger, louder, angrier. The sky rumbled like a monster waking from a long sleep. The human man pushed forward with heavy steps, his feet sinking deep into the snow every time he moved. Lyra followed behind him, shaking from cold and fear. The wind tried to pull her back, but the sight of the human carrying her child kept her moving. She refused to lose Rin, not now. Not after he had survived this far. The human's back was bent slightly from the weight of pushing through the storm while protecting the child under his coat. With every step, snow slammed against him so hard that Lyra expected him to collapse, but he never did. He kept going, step by step, as if something inside him refused to give up. Lyra had seen strong aliens fall during storms like this, but this human. He walked like he was fighting the storm itself. They passed a half-broken fence, then a frozen tree trunk bent almost in half from the weight of the ice. The storm howled around them, the sound so loud it felt like the entire world was screaming. Lyra saw the human's clothes shaking violently in the wind. His shoulders trembled. His breath came out in short bursts. His face had lost most of its color, yet he held the child closer. He tightened his arms every time the wind grew worse. Lyra watched him move his body to block the icy blades flying through the air. A sharp piece of frozen branch rushed toward them like a spear. Lyra's eyes widened in fear. Before she could shout, the human turned his back, taking the hit himself. The branch cracked against him and fell to the ground. He let out a grunt of pain but didn't stop walking, not even for a second. Lyra's heart twisted. No alien, not even members of her own clan, would risk such injuries for someone else's child. It was not their way. Everyone lived for their own family, their own small circle. But this human, he cared for a stranger's child more than anyone she knew. She could not understand it. She wanted to ask him why, but the storm made it impossible to talk. Every time she opened her mouth, the wind pushed snow into it. So she stayed silent and watched him, her mind racing with questions. The ground became uneven. They were climbing now a small icy hill covered in sharp stones and frozen branches. The human struggled but kept moving, using his free arm to pull himself forward. Lyra's heart pounded as she climbed behind him. Her hands slipped several times. She almost fell backward once, but she caught herself in time. Suddenly, the human slipped on a patch of invisible black ice. His foot twisted, and he almost crashed onto the ground with Rin in his arms. Lyra gasped, but before she could reach him, he regained his balance. He held the child tightly and stood again, limping slightly. His determination scared her. It wasn't normal to care this much. It wasn't natural. At least, not for any species she knew. Then she remembered something. Long ago, she had heard old stories about humans. Some said humans were unpredictable and too emotional. Some said humans could be cruel. But some stories whispered something different. that humans were capable of fierce loyalty and unimaginable sacrifice, even for strangers. She had never believed those stories. She thought they were just fantasies, but now, watching this human fight a deadly storm with a child in his arms, she wondered if those stories were true. Minutes later, the human stopped. Lyra almost bumped into him. He didn't turn around. He simply raised his hand and pointed ahead. Lyra followed the direction of his finger, and her breath caught. There was a structure ahead. A small, square shape half buried under the snow. It looked old and forgotten, with metal walls and a curved roof. The storm slammed against it, making the metal creak. But it was still standing. "Shelter!" the human shouted. Though his voice cracked from the cold, Lyra felt tears in her eyes, not from the wind, but from hope. But before they could reach it, the storm attacked again. A strong gust of wind slammed into them, knocking Lyra to her knees. The human bent forward, covering Rin with both arms. Snow piled up around them so fast it felt like the storm wanted to bury them alive. The human struggled to stand. He was exhausted, she could see it. His legs shook. His breathing grew louder, more painful. But then, something incredible happened. He lifted his head and roared, not a scream. Not a cry. A roar deep, powerful, filled with defiance. It was a sound that did not belong to someone giving up. It belonged to someone who refused to lose. With a final push, he stood up, tightened his grip on Rin, and forced his way forward. Lyra followed, her heart pounding with new strength she didn't know she had. Together, step by step, they reached the shelter door. As the human kicked the frozen handle, breaking it open with his injured leg. Lyra realized something she had never believed before. This human was risking his life for her child, risking more than any alien ever would. The shelter door crashed open with a loud metallic snap, echoing through the icy wind like a broken scream. The human stumbled inside first, shielding Rin with his arms. Lyra followed quickly, nearly falling as she crossed the threshold. The moment the door closed behind them, the deafening roar of the storm softened, but it never disappeared. It sounded like a giant beast growling just outside, waiting for them to make a mistake. Inside, the air was freezing. The room was dark, filled with old metal shelves, broken crates, and dust that turned to ice crystals on the walls. It was clear no one had used this place in years. But compared to the storm outside, it felt like a small miracle, a fragile bubble of safety in a world filled with cold death. The human knelt down on the floor, placing Rin gently in his lap. His breath shook as he pulled open his coat and checked the child. Rin's small chest was moving, but his breaths were weak and fast. Lyra fell to her knees next to them, her hands trembling violently, not just from cold, but from fear. She touched her child's cheek. It was far too cold, too pale. Her heart squeezed painfully. "Is he alive?" Lyra asked, her voice breaking. The human nodded, but his expression was tight. "Yes, but he needs warmth, fast." His voice was rough and tired, but still steady. He pulled off his gloves, showing fingers red, cracked, and bleeding from the cold, and rubbed the child's tiny hands between his palms. Lyra watched him, stunned. This human had already taken so many hits from the storm, but he still focused on Rin like nothing else mattered. The human looked around the dark room, scanning every corner. "There should be something here," he murmured. "Old shelters like this. They used to store emergency supplies." He stood up, limping slightly, and searched through metal boxes one by one. Lyra wanted to help, but her body felt too weak. Her bones ached like they were turning to ice. But she forced herself up, moving slowly toward a broken cabinet. Together, they searched the entire shelter. Most boxes were empty, just old scraps, useless metal pieces, and frozen cloth. But then the human found something. He pulled out a small fire starter kit, old but still functional. Lyra's eyes widened with hope. "It might work," he said softly. He took dry pieces of wood from a broken shelf and arranged them carefully on the ground. His hands trembled as he struck the fire starter again and again. The sparks were tiny, disappearing almost immediately. Lyra held her breath, watching each failed attempt. The storm rattled the shelter walls like it wanted to crush them. Finally, a spark landed on the wood. A tiny flame appeared. Weak, golden. Alive. Lyra gasped. The human exhaled in relief and leaned close, gently blowing on the flame until it grew bigger. The fire warmed the air slowly, pushing away the cold darkness around them. It wasn't much, but it was hope, a small, glowing hope in the middle of a nightmare. He lifted Rin and placed the child close to the fire. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the warmth brush against her skin like a soft whisper. She had forgotten what warmth felt like. After a long silence, the human sat down heavily, his back against the wall. His shoulders were tense, and he winced when he touched his bruised side. Lyra finally noticed the dark patch on his coat blood. Her breath caught. "You're hurt," she said quickly. He shrugged. "I'm fine." He wasn't. She could see it clearly. But he didn't complain. He didn't talk about his pain. He only looked at Rin, watching the child's breathing. "You risked your life," Lyra whispered. Her voice trembled. "For us. For a child not even from your species." The human finally looked at her. His eyes were tired but warm. "A child is a child. Species doesn't matter." Lyra's chest tightened. No one in her village ever said words like that. No one believed that. She stared at him like he was some creature from another legend. The storm outside hit the shelter with a violent thud, shaking the walls. Rin whimpered in his sleep, and Lyra quickly moved closer to him, brushing his hair gently. For the first time since the storm began, she felt safe, not because of the shelter, not because of the fire, but because of the human sitting beside it. A stranger. Someone she should have feared. Someone she was told never to trust. Yet here he was, protecting her child, saving their lives, bleeding for them. She sat beside him slowly, still unsure if this was real. "You don't even know us," she whispered. The human gave a small, tired smile. "Sometimes. Helping doesn't need a reason." Lyra looked at him in silence, her heart beating with a strange warmth. She didn't know this human's name. She didn't know his past. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was the moment her view of humans changed forever. The small fire flickered softly, sending warm light across the cold metal walls. Outside, the storm screamed with the fury of a wild beast, hitting the shelter again and again. Each thunderous crash made Lyra jump. She hugged her arms tightly around herself while watching the human man sitting near Rin, who now lay wrapped in both his mother's cloth and the human's thick coat. The child's breathing had become steadier, but still fragile like a tiny flame fighting to stay alive. Hours passed. The wind never rested. The cold seeped through cracks in the walls. Lyra felt her fingers stiffening again. She scooted closer to the fire, her eyes never leaving her child. The human sat opposite her, leaning against the wall. His head was tilted down, and his chest rose and fell slowly. He looked exhausted. Every part of him looked worn out, his clothes, his bruised skin, even his breathing. Lyra finally spoke, her voice soft and unsure. "You shouldn't have helped us." The human lifted his head. His eyes were tired, but gentle. "Of course I should have. You risked your life," she whispered. "Why? You don't know me. You don't know my child." He looked at the sleeping Rin, a softness forming in his eyes. "When I heard the screams," he said slowly, "I remembered another voice. From my past." Lyra leaned forward slightly. She didn't know why, but she wanted to hear more. "My little sister," he continued. "She was only 8. There was a storm. Not ice like this, but a sandstorm. We were trapped far from home. His voice shook slightly. I tried to save her. I tried so hard, but I wasn't fast enough. Lyra's heart tightened. He swallowed and took a shaky breath. I made myself a promise that day. If I ever heard a child crying like she did, I would never ignore it. Never again. Lyra stared at him. The firelight made his face look older, broken, but brave. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know humans had pain like this inside them. Her people always spoke of humans as tough, heartless beings who cared only about themselves. But sitting in front of her was a man whose whole life had been shaped by loss. And by love. I'm sorry, she whispered, meaning it. He shook his head. Don't be. Saving your child. It feels like I'm finally keeping my promise. Silence filled the shelter again, but it was a warm silence. A human and an alien sitting together, sharing pain neither expected to share. Outside, the storm roared even louder. The shelter trembled violently. Lyra jumped to her feet. Is it collapsing? The human stood too, moving quickly despite his injuries. He pressed his hand against the metal wall. It vibrated under his touch. The storm is getting worse, he said. We need to support the roof. He went to a broken crate and pulled out a long wooden plank. Lyra helped him lift it, her hands shaking. Together, they placed it under a weak part of the ceiling. The wind slammed down again and the roof bent dangerously, but the plank held barely. When they returned to the fire, both were breathing heavily. For a moment, they simply stared at the child sleeping in front of the tiny flame. Lyra sat down and rubbed her hands, trying to warm them. She glanced at the human's shoulder. Blood had soaked through the cloth. You're still bleeding, she said. He shrugged. It's nothing. It's not nothing, she insisted, moving closer. Let me see. He hesitated but nodded. Lyra gently pressed the torn cloth aside. A large bruise spread across his skin, with cuts from where the sharp ice had hit him. She tore a strip of her own sleeve and tied it tightly around his shoulder. The human watched her quietly, surprised. You didn't have to, he murmured. She looked him straight in the eye. You didn't have to save my child either. Their eyes held for a long moment, two strangers connected by fear, loss, and the strange warmth forming between them. Suddenly, Rin whimpered in his sleep. Lyra rushed to him, touching his forehead. It was warmer than before. She sighed in relief. The human smiled softly. He'll survive, he said. Lyra looked at him, her voice trembling. You saved him. Without you, he would be gone. The human shook his head. We saved him. Both of us. Lyra's throat tightened. She hadn't heard words like that in years. Her people never used we. They believed everyone should survive on their own. But this human believed differently. The storm hit the shelter again. But Lyra didn't flinch this time. Because for the first time since the nightmare started, she didn't feel alone. The truth was clear now, a truth colder than the storm, yet warmer than the fire. Humans were not what she was taught to believe. And this human had changed her heart forever. The storm did not quiet. Instead, it became something terrifying. The wind outside howled with a deeper, heavier sound, like the sky itself was tearing apart. The metal walls groaned, bending inward as if invisible hands were crushing them. Lyra held Rin close while the fire flickered wildly, shadows dancing across the room like frightened ghosts. The human stood up, tense, listening to every vibration in the walls. His jaw tightened. The storm is shifting, he said. The roof might not hold much longer. Lyra's heart stopped for a moment. What do we do? He looked at the ceiling, already denting under the pressure of heavy ice. He scanned the room quickly, eyes sharp, calculating. Rin stirred weakly in her arms. The child was breathing better now, but still too fragile. One cold wind through a broken roof could steal all the warmth they fought so hard to gain. The human moved toward the door and pushed it slightly. A blast of icy wind forced it back immediately. The storm outside was worse than before, wild, violent, merciless. "We can't stay here," he said. "If the roof collapses, we won't survive." Lyra felt panic spread through her chest. "But outside we'll freeze." He turned to her with calm, steady eyes. "There's another shelter," he said. "A bigger one. If we can reach it, you and your child will live. You and your child." "Not we." Lyra understood instantly. "You're not coming with us?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes drifted to the plank supporting the roof. It was already bending. Cracks crawled across the metal like thin white scars. Finally, he spoke. "This roof, it won't last while we're moving. Someone needs to hold it until you're out." Lyra's breath stopped. Her eyes widened. "No," she said immediately. "You can't stay." He smiled, a tired, gentle smile that hurt her more than the storm. "If someone doesn't hold it, you won't make it outside." The roof groaned again, and Lyra flinched. Rin whimpered in her arms. The human stepped forward. "Listen to me," he said softly but firmly. "Your child has a chance. You have a chance. I won't let that chance die in this room." Lyra shook her head fast. "Why? Why would you do this? You don't know us. You owe us nothing." He looked at the child, small, innocent, breathing softly. His eyes softened again. "Because someone must choose to be the one who saves," he whispered. "This time, that someone is me." Lyra's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to scream, to force him to come with them. But the shelter shook violently, and a piece of ice broke through the roof, hitting the floor with a heavy crash. Rin cried out. Lyra instinctively shielded him. The human grabbed the plank, using both hands to hold it as the roof pressed down harder. His arms trembled instantly from the weight. His breath strained. His legs shook. The roof pushed like a living force trying to crush him. "Go!" he shouted. Lyra stood frozen. She stared at him, the human who saved her child, the human who gave his coat, who fought the storm, who bled for them. And now he was standing under a collapsing roof, risking his life again. Tears filled her eyes. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to help hold the roof. But the human shook his head violently. "Your child," he yelled. "He needs you. Move." Rin cried louder, his tiny voice full of fear. Lyra swallowed her tears and ran to the door. The human shouted over the storm. "There's a path on the right. Follow the rocks. Don't stop, no matter how strong the wind gets." She pulled the door open with shaking hands. The wind punched her in the face, freezing her tears instantly. Snow hit her like tiny knives. She hugged Rin tightly and looked back one last time. The human was still holding the plank, his arms shaking violently. The roof bent lower, pressing down on him. But his eyes were steady, strong, unbroken. "Go!" he shouted again, louder, forcing bravery into her heart. Lyra turned and ran into the storm. The wind tried to push her back. But she kept going because behind her was a human holding up a collapsing roof with nothing but his own strength and a promise he refused to break. She staggered through the snow, following the rocks just as he said. Her legs shook, her breath burned, but she kept moving. For Rin, for the human who stayed behind, when she finally saw the shape of a larger shelter ahead, she stumbled toward it, crying in relief. But her heart ached with fear. Would he survive? Would he make it out? She didn't know. But one thing was certain, that human had just made a choice no alien in her world ever would. The second shelter was larger, stronger, and half buried under ice. Lyra reached it with the last of her strength, falling to her knees in the snow. Her arms tightened around Rin, whose tiny breaths warmed her chest just enough to remind her why she had run. She forced herself up, pushed open the heavy metal door, and stumbled inside. Warmth didn't greet her. Safety didn't greet her. Only silence did, a deep, hollow silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. She lowered Rin onto a pile of old blankets and wrapped him tightly. His breathing was still shallow but steady. Relief washed over her, but only for a moment. Because the second she looked at the door, her heart twisted painfully. He was still out there. The human. The man who held a collapsing roof so she and Rin could escape. Lyra pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She tried to shake the picture from her mind, the weight of the metal roof bending over his body. His arms shaking violently. His voice shouting, "Go!" Even while danger crushed in on him, her legs moved before her thoughts could form. She turned back to the door, but the moment she reached it, a violent gust slammed against the metal, shaking the entire structure. Snow flew through a crack, hitting her face like icy needles. She stepped back instinctively. "No," she whispered. "He's still there. He's alone." Another thud hit the shelter. The wind screamed like it wanted to tear the world apart. But even the storm couldn't silence the thought bursting inside her. I cannot leave him behind. She looked at her child Rin, small and sleeping, wrapped in layers of cloth. Her heart broke. She didn't want to leave him, not even for a second. But someone had stayed behind for her child. Someone who owed her nothing. Someone who chose to risk his life. She whispered a promise to Rin. "Stay safe, my love. I will come back. I will bring him back." Lyra covered Rin with every warm cloth she could find. She touched his tiny cheek, then stood up with shaking legs. She took a breath so deep it felt like it scraped her lungs, pushed the door open, and stepped back into the storm. It hit her like a wall. Icy wind blasted her face, and snow swirled around her like angry ghosts. But she leaned forward, determined. She followed the trail she had left earlier, the prints already, half erased, but her memory guided her steps. The closer she got to the first shelter, the colder the air felt. The storm howled even louder here. Her heart pounded as she saw the shape of the shelter door buried under snow. "Please," she whispered. "Please be alive." She reached the door and grabbed the handle, pulling it with all her strength. It didn't move. Frozen solid, she slammed her shoulder into it. "Open." She cried, "Nothing." So she scraped the ice away with her hands already numb and reddened. She clawed and scratched until the ice broke and the handle finally loosened. With one final pull, the door shook open. Cold darkness spilled out. Lyra gasped. The roof had partially collapsed metal, beams bent downward like broken ribs. Snow had poured inside. The fire was dead. The air was cold and sharp. She stepped inside, her heart trembling. "Human?" she whispered, her voice cracking. She moved pieces of broken wood and metal aside. Her hands shook violently. She searched under a collapsed beam, then under a pile of snow. Nothing. Her breath quickened. She dropped to her knees. "Please," she begged into the darkness. "Please, answer me." A faint sound reached her ears, a low, painful breath. Her eyes widened. She scrambled toward the sound, pushing aside chunks of ice until she saw him. The human lay half buried under a broken beam. His face pale and scratched, his clothes ripped, his body trembling with exhaustion. But his eyes were open barely, and they found hers. "You came back," he whispered weakly. Tears burst from her eyes instantly. "Of course I came back," she cried. "You saved my child. I will not let you die here." She grabbed the beam and pushed with all her strength. It didn't move. She tried again, harder, screaming through her teeth. The storm outside roared louder, as if cheering for the darkness. The human shook his head slowly. "It's too heavy," he whispered. Lyra glared at him through her tears. "Nothing is too heavy," she said fiercely. "Not for someone who saved my family." She braced her feet, wrapped her arms around the beam, and pushed with every drop of strength left in her body. A sharp pain shot through her arms, her muscles shaking violently, but the beam moved an inch. One more, she told herself. She pushed again, and again, and again. Finally, the beam rolled aside. She fell to her knees, breathing hard, tears streaming down. She grabbed the human's arms and pulled him up, hugging him tightly against her shoulder so that he wouldn't fall. "We're getting out of here," she said firmly. "You're not dying today." He gave a weak smile, one mixed with pain, relief, and disbelief. Lyra helped him stand, half supporting his weight. Together, step by step, they walked into the raging storm. Only now, Lyra was the one shielding him with her body. Her people had always taught her fear. The storm had taught her pain. But this human had taught her mercy. Mercy she had never known, and she would not let mercy die.